Okay, so you want to own a trucking fleet. Buy some trucks, hire some drivers, watch the money roll in every time a load gets delivered. That is roughly what most people imagine when they picture this business. A truck moves stuff from point A to point B. Someone pays you for it. Sounds clean, sounds simple. And if you look at the surface numbers, the United States trucking industry generated $906 billion in revenue in 2024. It sounds like one of the most reliable ways to build wealth in America. It is not clean, it is not simple. And the gap between what trucking looks like from the outside and what it actually is on the inside is one of the most brutal gaps in any industry you can enter. Here is what the industry actually is. It is a business where your costs are fixed every single day and your revenue is not. Where you can do everything right, buy the right trucks, hire the right drivers, land the right contracts, and still lose money for 3 straight years. Where a company that was operating for nearly 100 years, with 30,000 employees and a $5 billion valuation, can be completely gone in a matter of weeks. And where the margin between a good year and a bad year for a single truck can be the difference between $8,000 in profit and $25,000 in losses. Let's start at the beginning. The purchase price. A new Class 8 tractor. That is the large cab-over-engine truck you see pulling freight trailers on the highway. Costs between $120,000 and $200,000. That is just the tractor. The trailer it pulls is separate. A standard dry van trailer, the kind used to move packaged goods, clothing, and furniture, adds another $40,000 to $70,000. If you want a refrigerated trailer for food or pharmaceuticals, that goes up to $85,000 or $90,000 on top of the tractor. So right away, before you have moved a single pallet, you are looking at a minimum of $160,000 for the most basic setup, and closer to $290,000 if you want a new refrigerated unit. Most people entering this business do not buy new. They go to the used market. A 4 to 7-year-old sleeper tractor with between 400,000 and 700,000 miles on it typically sells for $35,000 to $75,000. That feels like a deal. It is not necessarily a deal. We will come back to this. But here is what nobody tells you about when you buy the truck. Before you legally move a single load for hire across state lines, you need to go through a regulatory checklist that costs you time and money you did not budget for. You need to register as a motor carrier with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, which runs through the Department of Transportation. That costs $300 and takes roughly 3 to 5 weeks. You need an International Registration Plan license plate, which is the plate that allows you to legally drive across multiple states without paying individual state permits at every border. That runs between $1,500 and $3,500 per year, depending on how many states you operate in. You need to pay the federal heavy vehicle use tax, which is $550 annually for vehicles over 55,000 pounds. You need to register for the International Fuel Tax Agreement, which tracks how much fuel you buy in each state and balances the tax between them. You need to join a drug and alcohol testing consortium for your driver. You need an electronic logging device installed in the cab to automatically track driving hours. You need commercial-grade GPS and fleet software. None of these costs are optional. Every single one of them is a legal requirement, and none of them move a single box of cargo. Add them up, and you are looking at somewhere between $3,000 and $11,000 in pure administrative startup costs, before insurance, before fuel, before you pay a driver a single cent. Now here is the trap with buying a used truck at $35,000 or $50,000. That truck has 400,000 to 700,000 miles on it. Commercial trucks are expected to last 1 million to 1.5 million miles with proper maintenance. But as a truck approaches those higher mileage ranges, it starts running through what mechanics call its wear cycles, the period where multiple major components begin to fail in close proximity. The engine may need a rebuild at 750,000 miles. The transmission might need replacement. The emissions system, a complex arrangement of filters and catalytic converters required by federal law, frequently needs cleaning or replacement on high-mileage trucks and can cost $4,000 to $8,000 per service visit. So the truck you bought for $50,000 may hit you with a $25,000 repair bill in the first year. By the time you factor that in, you have spent more than you would have on a new truck, and the new truck comes with a warranty. That is not the worst part. The worst part is that while your truck is in the shop getting repaired, it is earning exactly $0. And your other costs, insurance, loan payments, administrative overhead, do not pause because your truck is not moving. Let's say you now have one truck legally registered and ready to operate. Walk through what it costs you each month before you make a single dollar driver wages. You cannot legally drive more than 11 hours a day under federal hours of service rules, so most long-haul operations require at least one dedicated driver. According to data from the American Transportation Research Institute, the primary research body for the trucking industry, total driver compensation in 2024 ran at 99.5 cents per mile, including wages and benefits. On a truck running 120,000 miles per year, that is $119,000 annually going to driver compensation alone. That is before you have paid for a single gallon of fuel. A fully loaded Class 8 tractor trailer gets between 6 and 7 miles per gallon of diesel. At an average national diesel price of around $4.50 per gallon, fuel costs run approximately 69 cents per mile. Across 120,000 miles, that is $83,000 per year. In diesel, alone equipment payments. If you financed a late model tractor and trailer combination, your loan or lease payments run at approximately 39 cents per mile, roughly $47,000 per year. Maintenance and repairs. Even on a well-maintained truck, routine service costs average roughly 20 cents per mile. 18 tires at up to $800 each for the steer tires. Brake systems. Engine oil at regulated change intervals. Filters. Electrical components. This is not if something goes wrong. This is the baseline cost of keeping the truck working normally. That amounts to about $24,000 per year. Insurance. Commercial auto liability insurance hit a record 10.5 cents per mile in 2024, according to the American Transportation Research Institute. That is roughly $12,200 per year for one truck. And for a new carrier operating under their own authority, meaning they just got their operating license, premiums often run higher, sometimes reaching $20,000 annually, because insurers view new operations as higher risk. Then there are the smaller ongoing costs. Tolls, quarterly fuel tax reconciliations, load board access fees so your dispatcher can find freight, electronic logging device software subscriptions. These add up to roughly $6,000 per year. Add all of that together. Driver, $119,000. Fuel, $83,000. Equipment payments, $47,000. Maintenance, $24,000. Insurance, $12,000. Admin and compliance, $6,000. Total, $291,000 per year before your truck earns its first dollar. Here is how trucking generates money. A shipper, Walmart, Amazon, a food manufacturer, a construction company, needs cargo moved from one location to another. They pay a carrier per mile. In 2024 and into 2025, a typical dry van load on the national spot market, meaning loads available for immediate booking on the open market, paid somewhere between $2 and $2.50 per mile. Take $2.50 per mile. Multiply it by 120,000 miles per year. That is $300,000 in gross revenue. Subtract $291,000 in costs. You are left with $9,000. Not $9,000 per month. $9,000 for the entire year. On $300,000 in gross revenue. That is a net margin of roughly 3%. And that is assuming everything goes right. No major breakdowns, no months without freight, no accidents. No surprise insurance increases mid-year. Now here's where it gets important to understand. That 3% margin is not protected. There is one variable on the revenue side, the per-mile rate, that can move violently, in either direction, based on forces that have absolutely nothing to do with how well you run your truck. The freight market operates on a simple economic principle. When demand for shipping is high and there are not enough trucks to cover it, rates go up. When there are too many trucks chasing too little freight, rates collapse. In 2020 and 2021, the pandemic scrambled supply chains worldwide. American consumers, stuck at home, bought physical goods at record rates. E-commerce exploded. The demand for trucks to move all of those goods sent spot market rates to historic highs, sometimes hitting $3.50 per mile or more on popular lanes. Carriers and owner-operators made money faster than they had in years, so they bought trucks, thousands of them. New trucks, used trucks, finance trucks, leased trucks, fleet sizes expanded. New operators entered the market in enormous numbers. Then 2022 arrived. Consumer spending began shifting back towards services and experiences. The surge in goods purchases cooled. But all of those trucks that had been ordered during the boom were now being delivered. Suddenly, there were far too many trucks competing for far fewer loads. Spot rates began to fall. Then they kept falling. By 2023 and into 2024, the industry entered what analysts were calling the Great Freight Recession, the longest sustained freight market downturn in modern history. Spot rates on some lanes fell below $2 per mile, on others, below $1.50. The American Transportation Research Institute reported that truckload carriers posted an average operating margin of negative 2.3% in 2024. The first loss-making year for the sector since 2019. Think about what that means. The average operating cost per mile was $2.26, and rates were coming in below that on large portions of the market. Carriers were, in many cases, literally paying to haul freight. The cost of operating the truck exceeded what shippers were paying to use it. Between 2023 and 2025, more than 88,000 trucking authorities were revoked or surrendered in a single year. In the first half of 2024 alone, nearly 10,000 carriers closed their doors. This is the volatility trap. The costs, your driver, your fuel, your loan payment, your insurance, show up every single month, rain or shine, boom or recession. The revenue only shows up when someone pays you to haul freight, at a rate that the market, not you, controls. Meet Yellow Corporation. Not a small fleet, not a startup, a nearly 100-year-old company. One of the largest less-than-truckload carriers in the United States, moving pallet-sized shipments of freight through a national network of terminals. At its peak, a $5 billion company, 30,000 employees, 22,000 union members represented by the Teamsters, 12,000 trucks, 35,000 trailers parked at terminals across the country. In August of 2023, Yellow ceased operations entirely and filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. 30,000 people lost their jobs in one of the largest mass layoffs in American history. The answer is not that they were incompetent. The answer is that trucking is a business with fixed costs and variable revenue. And when the gap between the two stays negative long enough, no amount of history or experience saves you. Yellow had been carrying significant debt for years, roughly $1.5 billion in outstanding obligations as of early 2023. The company had received a $700 million emergency loan from the federal government during the pandemic. They were trying to restructure their operating network to cut costs. But at the same time, freight rates were falling, and customers, sensing instability at the company, started moving their freight to competitors. Shipments fell 13% in the first quarter of 2023 compared to the prior year. In July of 2023, Yellow missed a $50 million payment to the Central States Pension and Health Fund, the fund that covered their union workers' health care benefits. A strike was threatened. Customers, not wanting to risk their freight being stranded, accelerated their departure to other carriers. The cash flow situation became impossible to recover from. It is with profound disappointment that Yellow announces that it is closing after nearly 100 years in business, said CEO Darren Hawkins. Because Yellow's collapse was not caused by bad trucking. It was caused by the structure of the industry itself. Fixed costs cannot be paused. Revenue can evaporate almost overnight when customers leave or rates fall. And once a carrier gets into a negative cash flow spiral, spending more each month than comes in, the spiral accelerates on its own. Customers leave because they sense danger. Revenue falls further. The carrier cuts costs. That makes service worse. More customers leave. The company that understood the industry best could not escape the math. There is a cost in trucking that does not show up on any invoice but quietly destroys margins for small fleets every single day. It is called deadhead miles, the distance a truck travels without any cargo on board. In 2024, according to the American Transportation Research Institute, the trucking industry average for empty miles rose to 16.7%, meaning for every 100 miles a truck drove, nearly 17 of them were driven hauling nothing at all. Here is what that costs in practice. Say your dispatcher finds a load paying $2.60 per mile, moving freight 1,000 miles from Chicago to Atlanta. On the surface, that is $2,600 for the load. A solid day's work, but your truck is currently in Memphis. Getting to the Chicago pickup location requires 200 miles of deadhead driving, fuel, driver time, and wear on the equipment, all with zero cargo revenue. Now your true yield is not $2.60 per mile. Your true yield is $2,600 divided by 1,200 total miles driven, $2.17 per mile. With an average industry operating cost of $2.26 per mile, that load does not just fail to make money. It costs you $112 to haul it. A load that appeared to pay well became a loss by the time all the miles were counted. This is why the way a dispatcher books freight matters as much as the price on the load board. It is also why larger fleets, operating across dozens of trucks and multiple geographic regions, can route trucks far more efficiently than a 5-truck operation. They have enough density to find backhaul freight going in every direction, keeping empty miles low. For a small fleet with no sophisticated routing capability, Deadhead miles can silently consume the difference between profitability and loss on almost every load. There is another cost that has been growing faster than almost any other line item in the trucking business, and it has nothing to do with fuel prices or driver wages. It is insurance. Commercial liability insurance for trucking reached a record 10.5 cents per mile in 2024. For small fleets, those operating between 1 and 20 trucks, insurance premiums have risen 47% since 2010. The reason for this is what lawyers and insurance professionals call nuclear verdicts. Jury awards in personal injury lawsuits against commercial truck companies that exceed $10 million. The average value of nuclear verdicts against transport companies jumped from $21 million in 2020 to $51 million in 2024. Consider what that means for a fleet owner. You are not just insuring against the cost of damage to the truck or the cargo, you are insuring against the possibility that one of your drivers, in one accident on one day, generates a lawsuit that reaches $50 million in a jury award. In 2024, there were 135 of these verdicts, totaling $31.3 billion collectively. Insurers have responded the way any rational business responds to uncontrolled losses. Many have exited the commercial trucking market entirely. The remaining insurers price their premiums to account for catastrophic risk. For a carrier with any blemish on their safety record, a single speeding violation by a driver, a logbook error, a minor accident that was not their fault, premiums jump sharply. One serious accident can make a small carrier effectively uninsurable, which means they cannot operate legally, which means the business is over. The insurance market is no longer a line item you budget for. It is an existential risk you manage every day, and one bad moment can end everything. At some point, a fleet owner who survives the early years starts thinking about growth. 10 trucks instead of 1, 50 trucks, 100. Here is what genuinely improves at scale. Fuel costs go from paying whatever the pump says to negotiating fleet fuel card contracts that can save anywhere from 45 cents to $2 per gallon through volume agreements, potentially saving $5,000 to $26,000 per year per truck. Insurance premiums come down on a per-unit basis because risk is spread across more vehicles. You can build or lease an in-house maintenance facility and hire mechanics directly, bypassing retail repair shop labor rates that run $150 or more per hour. You can attract dedicated shippers, large retailers, manufacturers, and distributors who sign multi-year contracts with guaranteed freight volumes, removing your dependence on the volatile spot market. Larger shippers simply will not deal with small fleets. They need carriers who can guarantee capacity at scale. But here is what gets harder at scale. A 100-truck fleet is no longer a trucking business. It is a corporation with all the complexity that brings. You now need a safety director whose entire job is managing driver compliance and accident documentation. You need a human resources department to handle hiring, termination, and the paperwork that comes with a workforce of 150 or more people. You need compliance officers who track federal regulations, which change frequently and carry steep fines for violations. You need a terminal yard, a physical facility with enough space to park your trucks overnight, maintain your equipment, and coordinate dispatch. Terminal leases in major metropolitan areas run tens of thousands of dollars per month. At 100 trucks, the CEO of the company is no longer thinking about where the next load comes from. They are managing cash flow, capital allocation, labor relations, insurance programs, technology contracts, and regulatory compliance simultaneously. The ones who cannot make that mental transition from driver or dispatcher to executive are the ones who find themselves with a large fleet and a business spiraling out of control because no single person can hold all of it together without the right structure. Now let's be specific about the numbers, because this is a business where the difference between success and failure is determined entirely by precision, the optimistic scenario. You operate a fleet of 10 trucks. Each truck runs 120,000 miles per year. You have secured dedicated contract lanes with a regional retailer at $2.75 per mile, with a fuel surcharge attached that automatically adjusts based on the weekly national diesel price index published by the Energy Information Administration. Your deadhead miles are under 10% because your contracts include backhaul provisions. Your drivers have clean records, keeping your insurance premiums at the lower end of the range, around $12,000 per truck annually. Gross revenue per truck, $330,000. Operating cost per truck at the industry average, adjusted for your fuel surcharge protection, roughly $255,000. Net profit per truck, approximately $75,000. Across 10 trucks, $750,000 in annual net operating profit. That is a real business. That is the kind of number that builds generational wealth over a decade. The realistic scenario. Freight rates soften. Your retailer renegotiates their contract down to $2.30 per mile when it comes up for renewal, citing competitive bids from other carriers. A driver has an accident, not serious, no one badly hurt, but a lawsuit is filed and settles for $800,000. Your insurance premium goes up 30% at the next renewal. One of your trucks needs an engine rebuild. Another sits idle for 6 weeks waiting for parts, which have been back-ordered due to supply chain delays at the manufacturer. Your empty miles creep up to 19% while you scramble to find replacement freight. Net profit per truck in that year. Somewhere between -5,000 and +15,000, depending on exactly how the numbers land. Across 10 trucks, at best 150,000 in profit, at worst 50,000 in losses. The difference between those two scenarios, the gap between a $750,000 year and a $50,000 loss year, is one bad contract renewal, one lawsuit, and 2 pieces of equipment that broke at the wrong time. None of those are exotic disasters. All 3 happen to someone in this industry every week. 85 to 90% of new owner-operators who enter this industry are out of business within 2 years. The primary cause, according to industry research, is not the trucking itself. It is cash flow. Running out of liquid money to cover the gap between when expenses come due and when revenue arrives. A shipper does not pay you the moment your truck delivers a load. In the trucking industry, payment terms are typically 30 to 60 days after delivery. But your fuel bill is due now. Your driver's paycheck is due every week. Your loan payment is due every month. The gap between delivering a load and receiving payment for it is a cash flow crisis waiting to happen for anyone who enters this business without 60 to 90 days of liquid operating capital sitting in reserve. The fleet owners who do succeed, and some do, meaningfully and sustainably, share a set of characteristics that have nothing to do with trucks. They track cost per mile obsessively, reviewing their numbers every week, not every quarter. They secure dedicated contracts before they buy trucks, not after. They maintain cash reserves large enough to survive 3 months of zero revenue. They invest in technology, route optimization software, predictive maintenance systems, driver monitoring cameras. Not because they want to, but because the data those tools produce is what keeps their costs under control. And they treat driver retention as the single most important operational variable in the business, because losing a driver costs several $1,000s in recruitment, training, and lost productivity, and a fleet with high driver turnover is a fleet bleeding money through its floor. The trucks are just the vehicles. The business is the cash, the contracts, the people, and the data. Every fleet owner who has built something lasting has understood that distinction. The next time you see an 18-wheeler rolling down the interstate, you are looking at somewhere between $150,000 and $200,000 of moving equipment, consuming roughly $50 of diesel per hour, operated by a driver whose total compensation package costs the fleet owner nearly $1 per mile, carrying cargo that pays $2.50 per mile if the market is kind that week. Owning one truck is genuinely hard. Owning 100 is a completely different kind of business, one where the margin for error is smaller, the stakes are higher, and the people who win are not the ones who understand trucks best. They are the ones who understand money.